It was 3 in the morning when I realized the man at pump 4 hadn't moved in over 20 minutes. My name is Cal. I was 26 that winter, working the overnight shift at a Sunoco out on Route 9 in central Pennsylvania. Small station, 2 bays, 6 pumps, a little glass booth where I sat and watched the lot through a scratched plexiglass window. The nearest town was Milheim, about 9 miles east. To the west, there was nothing but dark road and a few dairy farms that had gone quiet around 10. Most overnights were nothing, truckers, the occasional college kid heading back from somewhere they shouldn't have been. A lot of empty hours with the freezer cases humming and a radio I kept low. I'd done that shift for almost a year. I thought I knew what quiet looked like. That night was the first time I learned there are different kinds of quiet. The man had pulled in around 2:50. Gray Dodge Ram, older model, one of those flatbed conversions with wooden slats bolted to the back, Pennsylvania plates. He pulled up to pump 4, which was the farthest pump from my booth. He got out slowly, not careful slowly, not like a bad knee, just slow, like he wasn't in a hurry and didn't plan to be. He lifted the nozzle, he put it in the tank. Then he just stood there. I watched him on the monitor, a small security feed on a screen bolted above the register. Grainy image. The timestamp in the corner was wrong by about 2 hours, but it worked well enough. He was tall, dark jacket. His hands were in his pockets, which is hard to do when you're theoretically holding a gas nozzle. Somehow he managed it. I figured the pump was running slow. Pump 4 did that on cold nights sometimes. I made a note to check it and went back to my receipt tape. 5 minutes went by. Then 10. I looked up again, he hadn't moved. I told myself he was waiting for a full tank. Maybe he'd nodded off standing up. I'd seen that once with a long-haul driver at pump 2. I considered going out to check, but it was February in central Pennsylvania, 19 degrees. The walk from my booth to pump 4 was a long one. The lot outside was bone dry, no snow, just that hard, breathtaking freeze. The canopy lights buzzed above the pumps, and where their glow ended, the dark was absolute. The tree line at the edge of the lot was a solid black wall. No wind, no distant sound of a car on the highway. Just the freezer cases and the low radio and that still figure standing next to the truck. I decided to wait a few more minutes. That's when the phone rang. It was the landline on the counter. The station sat in a cell-dead zone, something about the ridge behind us, so we kept a landline for emergencies. I picked it up. Nobody spoke. It wasn't silence exactly. It was more like someone on the other end being very deliberate about not speaking. I could hear breathing, slow, measured, the kind that takes effort to keep even. It went on for 4 or 5 seconds, long enough to be intentional. I said hello twice, then hung up. I looked at the monitor. The man was still at pump 4. He'd turned slightly. He was facing the booth now, facing me. The pump clicked off, full tank. He didn't move to replace the nozzle. I pulled out the logbook and wrote down the time, 3:14. I wrote down the truck. I wrote down pump 4. I don't know why I did it, some instinct. I just felt like I should have a record. Around 3:20, he walked inside. The door chimed, cold air came in hard behind him. He brought a smell with him too, not bad, just the smell of someone who'd been outside in that kind of cold for a long time. Wool and exhaust and something faintly chemical I couldn't place. He was older than I'd thought from the monitor. Late 50s maybe, heavy jaw, close-cropped gray hair. His jacket was a dark olive with no logo, no brand, just plain. He walked to the back of the store and stood in front of the cooler doors for a full minute without opening them. Then he came to the counter. He set down 2 things, a bottle of water and a road map, one of those old paper maps, folded wrong, the kind you don't see anymore. He paid in cash, exact change, $4.28, counted out in coins, quarters, dimes, 1 nickel, 3 pennies. He counted it twice, then he looked up at me and counted it a 3rd time without breaking eye contact. His eyes were pale, some light color, that red-gray under the fluorescence. He didn't seem nervous. He wasn't performing anything. He was watching me the way you watch a problem you're still working out. I held the look as long as I could without making it a thing, then glanced down at the coins. I handed him his receipt. He didn't take it. He said, "You know if anybody else is working tonight?" I told him no, just me. He nodded slow. What about the back? I said there was no back, just the storage room. That was locked. He picked up the water and the map, left the receipt on the counter, and walked outside. I watched the monitor. He went back to pump 4. He stood next to his truck and unfolded the map and looked at it. 19 degrees outside. He stood there looking at a paper map for 6 straight minutes, and I know he wasn't actually reading it because he never tilted it toward the light. The freezer cases hummed. The radio played something I wasn't following anymore. I became very aware of the sound of my own breathing. I held still and listened to the lot outside. There was nothing, no passing trucks, no wind, just the low electrical hiss of the overhead lights and that man standing in the cold with a map. I tried my cell, no signal, same as always. I picked up the landline. I was going to call the county non-emergency line just to have someone on the phone. The landline clicked, gave me a half-second of dial tone, and went dead. I held the receiver for a moment, put it down. Outside, a second vehicle turned into the lot. White Econoline van, no markings. It parked along the side of the building where the dumpsters were, not at a pump, not near the door. It just pulled up and stopped. The headlights stayed on for about 30 seconds, then went off. Nobody got out. I went cold. I want to be careful here. I wasn't jumping to conclusions. I was actively looking for the normal explanation. Two guys meeting up, a delivery van that had taken a wrong turn. But the van wasn't idling. I could see the air outside and there was no exhaust. The engine was off. Someone had parked intentionally and shut everything down and just sat there in the dark. At 19 degrees with no engine running, that van would be unlivable in 20 minutes. Whoever was inside was either prepared for that or they weren't planning to stay long. And the man at pump 4 had stopped looking at his map. He was facing the van. They knew each other. That was when I knew, not a guess, not a bad feeling, I knew. Two vehicles, two positions on opposite sides of the building. One person who had already come inside asked his questions and gone back out. One parked at the pump closest to the door, one blocking the side, the geometry of it. I'd never had a name for what I was looking at, but I did now. I had a tire iron under the counter. I picked it up. It was cold in my hand and heavier than I needed it to be, but I held it. The phone rang again. A woman's voice this time. She said, "Is this the Sunoco on Route 9? I said yes. She said her husband had pulled off the highway near here. She was trying to reach him. His name was Dale. He drove an old Dodge Ram. I said I thought I'd seen him. She said, "Can you tell him the dog got into something? He needs to call me when he gets signal." I stood there a second, then I said sure. She thanked me and hung up. I looked at the monitor. The man, Dale, was back at his truck. He was putting the nozzle away. He got in. The Ram started up. The Econoline, and I watched this on the camera, its headlights came back on. It pulled forward and turned west onto Route 9. Dale's truck pulled out east, toward Milheim. They left within 45 seconds of each other and went in opposite directions. I stood at the counter with a tire iron in my hand and didn't move for probably 3 full minutes. The freezer cases hummed. The radio played on. The lot was empty and lit and utterly still, and I watched it on that grainy little monitor until my hands started to ache from gripping the iron. Here's what I don't know. I don't know if Dale's wife was telling the truth. I don't know if that call was what it sounded like. I don't know why the landline went dead and then came back. I don't know why the van parked where it parked, and I don't know why both vehicles left the moment a random phone call interrupted whatever I had apparently interrupted. I reported it the next morning to the county sheriff's office. A deputy named Weller came by around noon. He looked at my logbook. He looked at the cameras. He told me the timestamp was wrong on the recording, which I already knew, and that made the footage basically useless. He didn't write much down. When he left, he paused at the door and said, "You do anything different tonight? Different route home, different routine, just for a little while." He didn't explain that, he just left. I worked 3 more weeks at that station before I got a different job over in State College. I never saw the Ram again, never saw the Econoline again. The landline worked fine every shift after that, like nothing had happened. I still stop for gas at night sometimes when I have to, but I always park close to the door, and if I see a truck sitting at a pump without anyone moving near it, I get back in my car. I don't wait to see if it makes sense. On the 3rd night, it knocked on a tree twice, then waited, then knocked twice again. My name is Derek. I'm 31. I've been backpacking since I was 14, when my uncle started taking me through the Ozarks every October. I know what a woodpecker sounds like. I know what a buck does to a sapling. I know the difference between a branch falling and something deliberate. That knocking was deliberate. The trip was planned 8 months out, 7 days solo in the Buffalo River country of northern Arkansas. I'd done it before, same general area, never the exact same trail. This time I went in off Highway 7, past Boxley Valley, and pushed northeast toward one of the more remote drainages. No maintained trail after the first 6 miles, just old topographic maps, a compass, and the kind of quiet most people never get to hear anymore. I left my Chevy Colorado at a small gravel pullout. 2 other trucks were already there, bow hunters, from the orange tape on their rigs. I signed the register, shouldered my pack, and I was gone by 7 in the morning on a Monday. Days 1 and 2 were perfect. Cold nights, clear days. I made good miles, camped near a spring, ate well, no one else on the trail. That's the way I wanted it. The first wrong thing happened on the morning of day 3. I stepped outside the tent early to get water heating. The ground was soft from a light rain the night before. I could see my boot prints from the evening, the path to the bear hang, the path to the creek. Normal stuff. Then I noticed a second set. They came from the eastern tree line. They walked a wide arc around my tent, maybe 15 feet out, and went back into the trees to the south. They were boot prints, deep-heeled, defined toe box, adult-sized, the same approximate size as mine. They didn't stop anywhere, they just circled and left. I stood there a long time looking at them. My first thought was another hiker, someone cutting through, curious about the camp, not wanting to wake me. That happens. I filed it under probably fine and started the stove, but it stayed in the back of my mind all day. I broke camp and moved northeast, climbing toward a long limestone ridge, clear and cold. I stopped for lunch on an exposed shelf with a good view of the valley below. I could see a long way. There was no one down there. I made camp again around 5. Different drainage, solid ground. Cooked, did my hang, read for an hour by headlamp. Normal, good, fine. I was zipping into my sleeping bag when I heard it. Footsteps not close, maybe 50 yards uphill, moving through the leaf litter. Slow and even, moving parallel to camp. I held still and listened. They went past and faded north. I told myself deer walk upright and even. They move at dusk and dark. I told myself deer, and I mostly meant it. On day 4 I pushed hard and gained elevation. The ridge up there is exposed. You can see in every direction. I watched my back trail for the better part of 2 hours. Nothing moved on it. No shape, no flash of color. Just the empty corridor of trees behind me and the wind. I did find one thing. About a mile from camp, hanging from a low branch over the trail, was a strip of orange surveyor's tape. That wasn't unusual by itself, but it was tied in a way I'd never seen. Not a simple loop, it was knotted. Knotted carefully, the way you tie a lanyard, the kind of knot that takes fingers and time and attention. I untied it and put it in my pocket. I don't know why. That night was when things changed. The footsteps came back, closer this time. They started around 10 o'clock and circled my camp the same way those boot prints had, the wide, slow arc. I was inside the tent with my headlamp off and a buck 119 in my hand, unsheathed since 9. I listened to them go around once, then they stopped. I waited 15 minutes. They started again, same direction, same pace. I tried to convince myself it was a lost hiker, someone confused, but no lost hiker circles a tent in the dark without calling out, and no lost hiker walks that evenly, that deliberately. The circles went on for almost an hour, then they just stopped. I didn't sleep. The next morning I found the prints again, same boot pattern, same arc around the tent, but they'd come in closer this time, 10 feet, maybe 8, and in one spot on the south side they had stopped. The toes pointed directly at the tent door. Someone or something had stood there looking at me while I slept. I packed up fast, didn't cook, ate a bar walking, moving by first light. About 3 miles out I hit the only other person I saw the whole trip, a woman in her 40s, solo hiker, coming the other way. She'd been in the backcountry 4 days, came in from the other trailhead. I asked if she'd seen anyone else out here. She shook her head. She hadn't seen a soul. I kept moving. That afternoon I lost my last bar of cell signal. I'd had 1 bar for most of the trip, not enough to call but enough to feel tethered. When it went, I felt it. The gap between me and everything normal got wider. I made camp in a hollow earlier than I wanted to. I was running on no sleep and I needed to think. I ate, hung my food, sat by a small fire until dark. The woods were quiet, no wind, that thick, wrapped around silence you only get deep in. Then came the knocking. 2 knocks on a tree trunk, pause, 2 more. I went still. I looked toward the sound, east, 60 yards or so. I knocked twice on the tree next to me. There was a pause. Then 2 knocks came back. My whole chest went cold. I put out the fire, I got in the tent, I held the knife and I did not move. An hour later, just at the edge of my headlamp's reach, I saw it. I won't call it a figure because I don't know what it was. It was tall, taller than a man. It was standing just past the tree line where the light stopped. It wasn't moving. I could see a shape but no detail. I watched it for a long time. It didn't leave. It just stood there in the dark at the boundary of the light, watching the tent. That was the moment, right there, when I understood I was not dealing with a person. I'm not saying it was something supernatural. I'm saying whatever was out there did not behave like any animal I know. It did not behave like any person I've ever encountered in the woods, and it had been following me for 2 days. I made a decision. At 2 in the morning, I got up and packed the tent around me, loaded my pack in the dark, clipped my headlamp on low so the beam pointed straight down, and I started moving. I didn't run. Running in the backcountry at night is how you break an ankle. I walked as fast as I could safely walk. I used the map and the compass, and I stayed on my bearing. Every 100 yards I stopped and listened. Twice I heard movement in the trees to my east. It was keeping pace, staying in the dark just outside the headlamp beam. I hiked for 4 hours. When I came out onto the gravel road and saw the pullout, my Colorado was still there. The bow hunters' trucks were gone, just mine, alone in the gray pre-dawn. I got in, locked the doors, and sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel. Then I drove south until I hit a Waffle House outside of Russellville. I sat in a booth for 2 hours, ate eggs, watched trucks roll past on the highway, felt like I was coming back from somewhere I couldn't describe. 2 weeks later, I called the Buffalo National River Ranger Station. I talked to a ranger for about 15 minutes. I described the prints, the knocking, the shape at the tree line. She went quiet for a moment, then she told me they do get reports like that from that part of the backcountry a few times a year. She said they'd never been able to identify what leaves those prints. She said they don't match any known animal in the region. She said it like she'd said it before. She didn't tell me not to go back. She didn't tell me to go back either. About 8 months later, I found a post on a hiking forum. Someone else had camped in the same general drainage, same time of year. He described boot-shaped prints in a circle around his tent. He described something standing at the tree line. He'd packed out at 3 in the morning. He didn't go back either. I still think about what it means that it knocked back, that when I gave it a signal, it answered. That something out there in those hills learned the call and returned it without hesitation. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. But I left something of myself out there in those woods, and I don't think I'll get it back. I still go to the Ozarks. I just don't go past the 6-mile mark anymore. On the night I came home and found my back door unlocked, I knew I'd been right for months. My name is Derek. I'm 31. I rent a duplex in a quiet stretch of Roanoke County, Virginia, on a dead-end street off Route 419. I work dispatch for a freight company, second shift, 3 to 11. My hours are odd, but they're predictable. Same days every week, same route home every night. I'm a careful person. I lock my doors. I notice things. I'm not the type to spiral over nothing. The first time I saw the car, I didn't think twice about it. It was a Tuesday in late October. I pulled my Tacoma into the driveway around 11:20, and there was a car parked across the street. Dark blue Buick, older model, looked like something from the 90s. Someone was in the driver's seat, interior dark. I couldn't make out the face. I figured it was someone waiting on a family member. I went inside. I forgot about it. A week later, same car, same spot, same time. I noticed because the street is a dead end, there's no reason to park there unless you live there. Nobody on that block drives a Buick. I stood at my front window for about 10 minutes. The car didn't move. The engine wasn't running. No glow of a phone screen, no cigarette ember, nothing, just a shape behind the wheel, sitting completely still in the dark. A cold front had moved through that afternoon, temperature in the upper 30s. That detail stuck with me. Whoever was out there had been sitting long enough that any residual heat from the engine would have been long gone. I went to bed, told myself it was nothing. Then my neighbor Patty knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon. She grows tomatoes and watches Jeopardy too loud, and she'd never had reason to bother me before. She said she'd seen a man walking around the side of my house the previous Wednesday. Around noon, I'd been at work. Medium height, maybe late 40s, dark jacket. She'd assumed he was a handyman, but he wasn't carrying anything. He stood in the side yard for a few minutes and walked back to the street. She apologized for not mentioning it sooner, said it had probably been nothing. I thanked her and closed the door. I went and checked the side yard. Grass along the fence line was slightly tramped down where someone had stood, not conclusive on its own, but the small padlock I keep on the side gate was unlatched. I always latch it. I know I do. The following week I ordered a package from Amazon, coffee pods and paper towels, nothing worth stealing. When it arrived, the box had been opened. The tape was cut clean along the seam and pressed back down, but not flush. The contents were still there, nothing taken. They had just looked. I called the non-emergency police line. The officer took my information, gave me a report number, and told me to call back if anything escalated. I understood what that meant. Nothing had happened yet, nothing he could act on. I started paying closer attention. I took a photo of the Buick the next time it showed up, too dark to read the plate clearly, but I got a partial. I wrote down dates in a small spiral notebook on the kitchen counter. I started varying my routine. Some nights I parked on the street instead of the driveway. Some nights I used the back door. Then in November, a coworker named Bettina stopped me in the break room. She said a man had called the dispatch office asking for my schedule, said he was a family member trying to coordinate a visit. She told him she couldn't give out employee information. He thanked her and hung up. She almost hadn't mentioned it. She thought it was a wrong number, but she knew I lived alone. Something about it had bothered her. I stood very still in that break room. The coffee maker was running a cycle behind me. The fluorescent light above the table had a flicker I'd reported twice that facilities had never fixed. I noticed both of those things in that sharp, hyper-focused way, the way your body understands something before your mind catches up. He had called my workplace. He knew where I worked. I drove home that night on every surface road I could find, stayed off Route 419. Added 20 minutes to a commute I could run in my sleep, checked my mirrors the whole way. No Buick. I got inside and triple-checked every lock. I stood in the kitchen without turning on many lights, just listening. The radiator ticked. Cold air seeped through the gap at the bottom of the back door. The smell of dead leaves in November coming in from outside. A smell that should have been ordinary. It wasn't. The camera I ordered arrived 2 days later. I put it up over the front door myself, wide-angle porch camera, footage stored to a cloud app. I pointed a second one at the driveway from a second-floor window, zip-tied to the curtain rod. It wasn't pretty. I didn't care. 2 weeks of nothing. I started to breathe again a little. Then I found the gift. It was a Tuesday, first week of December. I came home from my shift and there was something sitting on the porch railing. A small paper bag folded over at the top. Inside was a coffee mug, plain white, nothing on it, and a folded note with my name on the outside. Just my first name, Derek. Inside it said, "Saw this and thought of you." No signature, no other words. I went cold. I stood on that porch holding the mug in both hands, and I could not move. It was well below freezing, hard December cold, and I was still in my work jacket and I could not feel it. I was aware of my own breathing, too slow, too deliberate, the way you breathe when you're trying not to make a sound even though you're alone. The street was empty and quiet. A dog somewhere down the block barked twice and went silent. I kept looking at the bag, at the clean fold at the top, at how carefully it had been placed on the railing rather than left on the doormat, and I understood without wanting to that this had been thought about. This had been deliberate. I went inside and opened the camera app. The footage showed him at 10:47 p.m. He walked up the driveway from the street, set the bag on the railing, stood there for a moment facing the door, and walked back the way he came. 43 seconds total, face partially visible, dark jacket. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hiding. He walked up and walked away like he was dropping off a birthday present. Like he expected me to be happy about it. I watched the clip 4 times. Each time I watched him stand there facing my front door, I felt something settle in my chest, cold and heavy. He stood with his hands at his sides, not fidgeting, not checking over his shoulder, relaxed. He had done the math on when I'd be home. He had timed his visit for just before that window. He knew my schedule better than some of my friends did. I called 911 that time, not the non-emergency line, 911. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. I showed them the footage. I showed them my written log. I showed them the note. One of them photographed everything. They ran the partial plate against the make and model and came up with a name. Gary Prout, 52 years old, lived in a town about 40 minutes south, just over the Franklin County line. I didn't know him. I had never heard that name in my life. The officers said they would make contact and get a preliminary warning on record. They told me to come in the next morning and formalize a stalking complaint. I was at the station at 8 a.m. with printed screenshots, my written log, and the note sealed in a zip-top bag. A detective named Caldwell took my statement. She was direct. She didn't treat me like I was overreacting. She told me they'd spoken to Gary Prout and that his explanation had been, in her words, not satisfactory. She told me to file for an emergency protective order that afternoon. I did. Bettina stayed at my place for 5 nights. She slept on the couch. I slept with my bedroom door locked and my phone on the charger next to my head. It helped having someone else in the house. Gary Prout was arrested 11 days later. Detective Caldwell called me at work. He had photographs of me on his phone, not screenshots. Actual photos taken at a distance over what appeared to be several months, me at the gas station, me loading groceries at the Harris Teeter on Brambleton Avenue, me walking from my truck to my front door. I still don't know how long before I noticed the Buick that he was already watching. The charge was stalking. He had a prior from another county, which I wasn't told until later. He entered a plea, supervised probation, mandatory counseling, and the protective order held. I still live in that duplex. I kept both cameras and added a third on the back corner of the house covering the gate. A locksmith installed a second deadbolt on both the front and back doors. I vary my route home. I switch between the driveway and the street. Small changes, different nights. Detective Caldwell told me those habits are good ones. She said most stalking cases don't start with something obvious. They start with something small that you almost talked yourself out of noticing. The Buick parked too long, the package opened and reclosed, the unlocked gate. I almost told myself it was nothing. Don't do that.